Well, I took off from Bradley International Airport the afternoon after Thanksgiving. I could have left on Saturday instead, but it would have cost like $800 more, something crazy. And I didn't want to take the chance of getting stuck in like the Thanksgiving delays and not getting to my international flight. So I flew to Atlanta and I caught my connection to Dallas-Fort Worth. I arrived late that night, around midnight. I caught a shuttle to my hotel a few minutes outside the airport. I had this nice little room, but the weather in Texas was horrible. It was like 50 degrees and raining the whole time I was there, so there really wasn't much of any interest to take any pictures except for the hotel room. That's it, you know. It's kind of a nice little room. I barely slept that evening as one of my fellow travelers was picking me up at 2 a.m. in the morning to make an early morning flight out to Houston. You know how that goes, right? You're trying to go to sleep at like 11 o'clock. You got to get up at 1. You don't want to miss the flight. I really didn't sleep at all. So it was back in the air first thing in the morning from Dallas-Fort Worth. We had to actually go to Houston for like a 4-hour layover, and then we boarded the next plane for a 6 or 7 hour flight to Panama. We arrived in Panama late afternoon for a 7-hour layover. Not much of interest in any of that. To be honest with you, that's the hard part of this, is like 20-something hours in the plane in the airports. Just lots of hanging around, you know. Our flight finally took off from Panama in the dark, in the midst of a thunderstorm, and we flew another 7 or 8 hours through the night to Manaus, Brazil. We arrived early in the morning hours, went through customs, and when we came out of security, we got a warm welcome from the 15 or so translators that we would spend the week with us on the boat. We grabbed our luggage, crammed into this little shuttle bus, and headed out for the boat docked in Manaus. It was a cozy half-hour or so ride through Manaus to the boat. We got a chance to chat with one another. The translators learned how large Manaus actually was, some of the interesting things of the night in Manaus. Finally, we arrived at the boat. As you can see, it was still dark in the morning. We were pretty exhausted after 28 hours of flying and hanging out at the airport. And we lugged our stuff on board and headed up top of the ship for breakfast. The kitchen crew was already there ahead of us, preparing breakfast for us. If there was one thing on this trip that was never a problem, it was the food. It was like unbelievable. This crew, they were like professional chefs, and the food was absolutely excellent. You know, plenty of food all the time. We had breakfast as the sun came up over a river tributary. As we ate, the crew made ready to weigh the anchor, and we began to slowly pull out towards the Amazon River. This photo is taken from the right side of the boat as we cruised in the center of the river, and I think it gives you some perspective on how large the Amazon River is at points. The second photo here is taken from the other side of the boat. Again, you know, remembering we're traveling in the center of the river, you can see how large that river is. It's like half a mile or so here, half a mile or so there. Very, very big river. One more photo, just looking ahead, just to give you that perspective. The trip downriver was 2 days, 48 hours to get to where we needed to go, so a little bit more travel. So there was a lot of time just kind of spent hanging out. You know, hanging out doing this, hanging out doing that, just hanging out. But again, the kitchen crew was always there to make sure there was food to kill some of the monotony, so you could at least eat if you didn't do anything else. We used the downtime whenever we could to prepare in advance. In this photo, we're all working on dividing fish hooks. There were a couple of teams of guys. We were racing to see who would get done first, you know. We put the different size hooks in like one individual smaller bag. These hooks and other small fishing supplies we used as gifts for the villagers. And the fishing supplies were also vital to what we called the men's ministry. I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. We used the top deck for many activities, including my bedroom. We prepped for ministry up there. We ate meals up there. We hung out up there. We did worship and devotionals up there. And when it got dark, the hammocks came out. And it was bedtime. There were 3 floors of this boat, and there was about 40 of us total. We slept in these hammocks side by side, It was a bit of adventure to figure out how to get in them. It was even more an adventure to figure out how to get out. You know, some of us, it was kind of laughable, including myself, rolling myself out of this thing. Personally, I'll take my bed any day, right? Hammocks are good for maybe a nap in the backyard. That's it. But they made it possible that for all these people to go, including the crew. Everybody slept in hammocks. It's just the way it was. I slept on the top floor of the boat. What was amazing to us was the boat had no screens. Yet we never needed bug spray, at least not on the boat, with the exception of one night when we drove into a swarm of gnats. That was kind of a bummer, but as long as we stayed in the middle of the river, the bugs, they just didn't know we were there, you know, and they kept the lights down or whatever else. Never had problems with mosquitoes or any of that stuff. Of course, they're on the shore, but they didn't figure out that we're out in the boat. Our morning started by rolling up our hammocks. I learned this whole thing. This guy taught me how to get it tight and hang it on the side. It took me about almost the last day to get it, you know. Then we would set up the tables for breakfast. We would eat and then clean up afterwards and then stack those tables down the back for devotions and worship. So it was like the all-purpose room, right? It was a team effort, and we got pretty quick at doing this thing. Our translators were super talented young people, a great group of young adults. We were all very impressed with the character of these young men and women. They led worship for our devotional time every morning and evening. They were our translators, you know, individually to speak to people and to pray with people. I mean, they just did an awesome job, you know. After worship, we jumped in the speedboats to head for the villages in the area for the day. Usually it took several trips to get everybody from the boat to the shore, and sometimes it was a mile or so that we'd have to go. It was low water season in the Amazon. I didn't really have enough time this morning to show you all the pictures, but the Amazon River was down 25 to 30 feet. And so that's a lot of water missing, right? The rainy season fills it back up. But what that means is the big boat can only go so far and then it hits the ground, right? So then we got to take the speedboats. This was the first village we visited. This is a typical village along the Amazon. We visited many of them, but I don't have time to show you pictures of them all today, so we'll just sort of take a look at this one. Most villages had like a courtyard or central meeting space where all the villagers would come to meet. In this photo, you can see that there's a cross. This was also typical for the villages along the Amazon. They had Catholic roots, and yet there was little actual church activity of any kind. They didn't like have a Sunday service. Maybe a priest came once in a blue moon. They didn't seem to practice their faith at all. This is a photo of most of our translators. You know, great group again. They were invaluable, as the Brazilian river people spoke Portuguese. And I don't do that. I don't speak really any language other than English well. So I needed their help a lot. They also ran the medical clinic along with a doctor and his wife who came aboard. They handed out parasitic meds to treat people for the waterborne the waterborne stuff, and they also would do topical treatments and those kinds of things. Some of these translators were dental and med students in Brazil. You know, just again, great group of kids. The villagers all came out to this courtyard area, and again, this is typical of the process we followed in every village. The water to be filtered was gathered from the river, as was the practice for most villagers. If you might have saw, there was a tank maybe, that first shot of the village, you know. So they caught rainwater, but rainwater isn't any better. Rainwater runs down unclean roofs, the birds do their business on and all that, so it's just unclean, and the river water is unclean. So we would just gather the water from there. You'll notice that it's brown. The Amazon River is a brown, muddy river. Everywhere you go, you cannot see through it at all. It's just brown mud. This is the water the people drank every day, and it's been that way for many generations. If you and I drank it, we would die. Maybe not totally die, but we would be incredibly sick for days. And while the locals have built up some resistance to lower level bacteria that would really make us sick, they get sick too. It's just not as bad as what happens to us. And when it's prolonged over a period of time, it can be really bad for the children and the elderly especially. Just not as bad as we would get it. Hopefully you can see in this next photo the smaller black spots in this close-up photo of the bucket. I actually had a video, but I didn't insert it. Those things are moving. Those are little fish and little tadpoles doing their business in there, right? They came along for the ride, I say, right? Again, very typical for river drinking water. They probably just throw them out. Oh, it's a little fish, boom. You know, no big deal. We started with the presentation of the filter and how the filter in the bucket worked and how they filter out the brown and water and the bacteria as well as the small fish. All of that goes. And in the end, the water is literally crystal clear and bacteria free. We would drink it ourselves to demonstrate it was safe, hoping that we didn't get a little tadpole. You know what I'm saying? But if we won't, they're not going to. So hopefully you saw the video that I posted with me and Chris Beth, the founder, sitting on the dock. We drank the river water right out of the Amazon, just right through this filtered thing, and that was it. And we never got sick, so it was good. We also show the villagers in this presentation how to clean this little filter. It's only about this big, you know, and all they need to do is backwash it. And it's crazy, but this Sawyer 0.1 filter that the Bucket Ministry uses will filter over 1 million gallons of water. And it lasts for approximately 20 years. This is a low-tech, low-cost solution for people all over the globe who are drinking all kinds of filthy water. Just awesome. Here are a couple of the village women pictured with their buckets. And we came back a few days later, and both of these ladies had their buckets set up in their kitchen. Everything was ready to go. They put them right into use. This is my buddy Walt. He's preaching the gospel. After the bucket distribution, we do a gospel presentation and an invitation to receive Christ. In this village, almost everyone raised a hand to accept Jesus. Of course, we never know really what that means, but 30 or 40 people are at least showing interest in Jesus. And the way it's done is obviously Walt presents the gospel in English, and then it's translated. Again, though there's vestiges of Catholicism in the area, it's almost void of any real religious affiliation. So there's a hunger for Christ. There's a hunger to know God there. The Bucket Ministry has now been partnering with several area pastors there in an attempt to make just a greater inroads into the communities. Again, think about it. It took me hours to fly there, but even if you live in Manaus, it's 2 days on a boat to even get to these people. And there's more people beyond that we couldn't get to because the water level was low. During the presentation, there's always a VBS. There's always something for the kids. We never forget the children. Keep that in mind, right? Never forget the children. So all the kids get a chance to do crafts and whatever else. And we do a gospel presentation for them, also age appropriate. And then this is a picture of me and my new friend, Pastor Jerry Lee. Pastor Jerry preached a baptism message at this village to help the villagers understand how baptism relates to their new faith. Sadly, this was a hard sell, as most of the villagers were baptized as infants and into the Catholic Church, and they had trouble understanding this concept of why we would want to be baptized as adults. So it was kind of a hard sell, that one. Nevertheless, we baptized one of the villagers as we were leaving the village. His name was Charlie Bench. It was a bit risky to baptize someone in the river. We saw him going in there with this pole, and he's doing this, and wonder, what's he doing? Well, there's poisonous snakes. There are piranha, and there are barbed stingrays that lay under the brown water, and you'll never see them. But by God's grace, Charlie was baptized, and everyone got back to the shore without incident. I filmed it from the shore. Risk taker that I am. There was a lot of fun along the way. This is Chris Beth. He's a great guy. I've grown to love him. I've been on a couple of trips now with him. When we all returned to the boat that night, Chris was telling us how on the trip back to the boat, a large, dangerous type fish jumped into the boat, and he caught it in his bare hands, wrestled it, and threw it out of the boat. If you look closely at the photo, there's a tiny fish in the hand he's holding up. It did jump out of the water, and he did catch it in his hand. But the rest was a tall and pretty fishy tail, right? You know, so they passed around the phone with the picture, and everybody could see. You know, Chris was exaggerating a little. We went to 3 other villages while we were there. The process was very much the same. Many came to Christ. All were thankful for the bucket filter and our coming to visit them. We went around in some areas. We visited homes where people had received buckets in the past year or 2 years or whatever, to kind of check on them, how they're doing. We showed the Jesus film in Portuguese. We prayed with people. We encouraged many who remain behind in that area, who working hard in the Lord long after we're heading back to America. So that's kind of what it was all about. I'm limited in time to help you understand the full scope of things, but just trying to give you sort of the broad overall, right? But there were a couple of substantial God moments along the way that I would like to share. The first is what we call the men's ministry. And I think this ties into what we're going to talk about today in our message about help them. This was an awesome opportunity to do that. This is Jerry Bell. Jerry is a typical Texan who loves Jesus, but also loves fishing and hunting and all kinds of manly things, right? Here he is after a fishing trip showing off his latest catch of 2 red piranhas. The size of these fish can take quite a bite out of you. I'll show you some teeth later on. Jerry was the perfect person to relate to the men at each of the villages we visited. We would kick off the men's ministry by inviting all the guys of the village to gather with us in a separate building. We'd lay out some of the fishing supplies on the table as eye candy, you know what I mean, when they walked in. Jerry would begin talking about his hunting and fishing episodes, and then he would ask the men, tell me some of your fish stories, your hunting tales. And eventually it got down to who had been bitten by this and what scar we had here or there. In this photo, you'll see this guy, he's pointing to his hand, right? That was from a snake bite he received in some kind of water snake or whatever. Another guy rolls up his pants. He's got a big scar from one of the stingray barbs. And notice in this photo also, the younger guy to the left, right, he has this kind of standoffish look, like he's not sure what to do with us, you know? This is how many of the men came into that gathering. But by the end, the men were more like this guy, laughing and smiling and enjoying the time. It opened the door for me to talk to them about a man's responsibility to guide his family spiritually. The time we spent with the men opened the door to their coming to the bucket presentation later and hearing the gospel preached and having an opportunity to receive Christ, many of which would likely have found something else to do that afternoon and let the wife go to the bucket thing. You know what I'm saying? Because we did this, all these guys came, they sat up front, they listened, and something had changed because we took the time to come to them and do this men's ministry. Jerry's ministry made all the difference in the world. I'll be honest with you, I had my doubts at the start of this thing, but I was amazed at what God did through that. All it really was a way to break the ice and show them that we cared and we were there to help them. Before it ended, one of the men stood up and he said, other people have come here, he said, but always they want something from us. But you've come just to help us. You are real friends, he said. And of course, that's being translated, but that's a powerful statement, that we went there to help them, and the witness for Christ was that, and that's what opened the door, you know? And we have to find how to do that here somehow, right? We did give them fishing supplies, but the highlight for everyone was not the fishing stuff. It was the friendship we began and the love of Christ that we left them with. It was awesome. Personally, again, I was amazed at how powerful the men's ministry time was. I had no idea how powerfully God could use, swapping fishtails and showing off scars to open up doors to the gospel in such a profound way. It was awesome. And then there was this family from the first village. I think that's their granddaughter with them. When we visited their home, they had, again, the bucket filter was all set up and in use. She actually had another little other I don't know, like a big, larger pot that the clean water was going in. She had the whole system ready to go. You might recognize her from the earlier photo. She was one of the ladies with the buckets, right? When we asked her what we could pray for her for, she asked us to pray for her husband, who was there with us. He had had a heart attack a couple years earlier, that God would preserve his life and keep him healthy. That's what she was asking. I sensed in my spirit that, her fear of losing him. And I don't know, what happens in that culture, when a wife loses her elderly husband like that, how that all works. I don't, I guess it depends on family and some other things, right? But obviously it would present a hardship and a heartache for her. I brought some fishing supplies for that family when we came, and she was so overwhelmed by our visit that she just began to cry. And it was kind of one of those moments when you're not sure exactly what's going on, but and of course the lack of being able to understand and need it translated makes things all the harder. But what I do know is that our visit was a God moment for her and her family, and our prayers were both coveted and appreciated. And I think about, I was really going through the pictures, I was reminded by so many of the people that I met, and it was good to remember, I promised that I would pray for her, And this is one thing that I think is awesome about taking these trips, is my kingdom, my vision of the kingdom has grown much greater than New England, you know what I mean? To all over the world. There are brothers and sisters in Christ all over the world, just like these people. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to get the opportunity to come and pray with them and be with them and help them along in their faith. Well, to wrap up, the last several days of the trip, we had, again, 48 hours back to Manaus to get on a plane. So as we made it way up the river and back to Manaus, there were a few fun activities that we did, such as speedboat rides on the river. That's one of them. There was, believe it or not, alligator catching at night. They call them caimans, but they're alligators all the way. I don't care what they call them. That thing is an alligator. Here's Jerry Bell. He's holding one up for a photo op. FYI, if you look closely, you can see the crew has duct taped their mouths for the picture. I remember going up close to the alligator. You could see in his eyes, let the tape off, buddy. We'll see how this goes. He's humiliated, But this is what they do for fun, I guess. I was with a crew that caught one even larger than the one Jerry has, and the crew was warning us. They're like, everyone get back, but everybody's so excited they're coming close, right? But it escaped the crew before it got taped and began flailing around the boat. You should have seen how fast everybody went back, right? And listened to the instructions after that. There was one girl, she literally bolted across the whole boat and jumped onto something like 40 feet away, And it really wasn't dangerous. He just ran out the door. He just went back in the river, But it was kind of fun. And then, in case you're wondering about the piranha, this is a photo of one I caught off the dock with just a hook and a piece of meat and a bit of line. Check out those teeth. Pretty nasty for sure. The ones that Jerry had, they were like this big. This is only about this big. You're going to take a hunk out of you for sure. This is Chris, Beth, and his wife, Sherry. Absolutely great people. I'd love to have them visit sometime in the future. I don't know. They live in Texas, so it's a far away, and there isn't a lot of churches or mission organizations up here that support them, so we'll have to wait and see. We ended our time together at a plaza in Manaus near the famous Opera House. We had a last meal together and said our goodbyes to all our Brazilian friends. There was a wonderful sense of love and fellowship that had grown between all of us during this week, and really with all the entire group, for me with the Bucket Ministry people in Texas, all of that. From there, we boarded a bus headed back to the riverboat, and eventually at like, I don't know, it was 11:30 or 12 o'clock in the morning, back to the airport for the 2 o'clock flight. I don't know why they do them that way, but it's like very, very difficult. 2 days later, I landed at Bradley, where Julie picked me up. As much as I enjoyed the trip and the experience, I tell you, it was good to be back home, So that's all, folks. All right.